Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. And my name is Dana Mantilia. I am your host. And today our guest is Alex Sharpe, and his company is Sharpe Consulting. So welcome, Alex. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your company?
Oh, thank you, Dana. Thank you for having me. So my firm is a boutique management consulting firm. We've been around for a little over 20 years, and we really specialize in two areas. One is cybersecurity, and the other one is digital transformation. I'm very proud to say we've successfully delivered to clients in over 20 countries on every continent except Antarctica. So
Wow.
I need to find a penguin or the National Science Foundation. That's all I can. I need to do it. I just need to do it. But we focus on, and we've been in the digital transformation cybersecurity space long before they became popular. So I'm very proud of it. We always try to put the customer first. It's always about them. So I think that's made us successful.
All right. And so today we're going to talk about the cloud that everybody thinks, oh, it's up in the cloud, it's safe. So why don't we talk a little bit about the cloud?
Okay, cool. And the cloud's an interesting subject. It's one of the things I've learned over time. Working with my clients, I've done about 30 cloud migrations / security projects, and there, people really do confuse what it's all about. So if you go back in history, we had these things called servers, right? And we started by plopping them in a closet someplace, and as the demand got bigger, we put it in a room and then maybe a floor or whatever, and then we put them in the data centers. And then a bunch of years later, we started outsourcing the data center to co-location facilities. We had all these names for them. And people think that's the cloud. But what's really happened is the cloud is an evolution beyond that. So it's really a collection of data centers, and they're connected together in a web. So a very common mistake is people think when they outsource to a cloud provider, whether it be an Azure or an AWS, an IBM, a Google, or even one of the smaller players or a SaaS player, they really think their applications and their data are sitting some physical location, but they're not. Because part of the security and part of the model, which not only reduces cost but improves access, is they use a technique called bit splitting. Fancy term for saying we chomp up your data and your apps, and we have it located in different places at a different point in time. We still move it around, and it not only makes it more cost effective, but there's a lot of security around that, because the term that's used happened to be one I like. It refers to reducing the blast radius. So if a center is compromised or a center goes down, it doesn't take down the entire cloud. It provides a lot of resiliency. And they also use a lot of other techniques like software-defined networks. So they're continually restructuring how the network works and how data is shared. So even in times of when an attack, say, are being hacked, the cloud provider can reorient the network, confusing the enemy. It's really kind of cool, and it provides a lot of other features. One of the other things most cloud providers do, and I just have to throw this in there because there's a cool movie reference, is they use solid state instead of like traditional storage devices. We've all seen the movies where somebody detonates like a nuclear weapon and it takes out all the electronics. Well, these data centers, more often than not, use solid state devices which were highly resilient against those kind of attacks. So the cloud is very much related to all that's gone on before with the data rooms, the data centers, and the like, but it's really taken it up like 3 or 4 notches. It's really very impressive, and there's a lot of services under that.
So what would you say the biggest thing is with the outsourcing? It sounds like I'm echoing back. The difference in outsourcing a data center or a hosting facility?
Oh, it's very, very different. So if you're looking at a data center, that's really a building with HVAC and electric, and it's got all this stuff, all the care and feeding, and you basically ask somebody else to run it for you. It's kind of like renting an apartment. but you still fill it with furniture and you live there and you got to worry about paying the bills and all that. Or like a hosting facility is the same sort of thing, but you're getting a fragment. With the cloud, you're really turning responsibility, and that's very important to understand. You're turning responsibility over to somebody else. They do all the daily care and feeding, and it's not located at one place. They provide all these extra services. And what's something that people forget is you can outsource responsibility, but you can't outsource accountability. So it's really a shared model. A lot of clients make that mistake that when they outsource it, they're outsourcing the accountability. But at the end of the day, they are still accountable for the security and the data protection and everything else. They've made the decision to outsource it. So their shareholders, their stakeholders, their investors, legal entities, regulators are still going to hold them accountable.
I bet there's a lot of people, though, that the difference, they don't know the difference with, they just think if their information is stored somewhere else, it's on the cloud, and it's the data center cloud, you call it what you want to call it, but that's what we really need to educate people about the difference. So I'm glad you're really taking the time to explain that, because that's quite a big difference. I mean, a data center being in one location, if there's a natural disaster or something, then, and that building gets completely wiped out, then unless it's bouncing over to somewhere else, that's going to be an issue. But people need to understand the basis of this, which you just did a very good job explaining.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You know, it's interesting. That is actually something people don't get their heads around. There's also a dirty little secret in the industry. The major cloud providers will advertise unlimited expansion. And one of the ways they do that is not only around the engineering, but all the major cloud providers will actually draw extra capacity from the competition. So there's also a cooperative, co-opetition model amongst them for those very reasons. Because the last thing a major cloud provider wants is if they lose a facility, they don't want to be held liable to their customers.
Right. Yep, that's a good point. Okay, so what is the relationship between the cloud, FedRAMP, and DFAR?
All right. So we're really getting into a CMMC kind of question. First of all, a little bit of an advertisement. SMBs are the small and medium-sized businesses are the ones that are affected the most by CMMC. So there's going to be a migration towards relying on third-party providers, different types of cloud offerings, whether it's software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, whatever. There's going to be more and more of a movement in that direction, which I think is a really, really good thing on a lot of levels. It's got to be part of your strategy if you do it and you want to think it through, but it makes a lot of sense because let's face it, most of these businesses are in business because they have a core competency. IT or cybersecurity is not their core competency.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So rely on the folks that do it well, right? It's like, would you operate on yourself? No, you go to doctors for a reason. And, professional athletes have coaches. Name an Olympian who doesn't have a coach, right?
Good point.
Funneling down into your question, FedRAMP is a really good program that was put in a number of years ago. The level of audits and the scrutiny that these vendors get is pretty impressive. It really is. Like anything else, it's not perfect. Well, the problem is the CMMC came in after that was done. So there needs to be some reconciliation between the two so that when a business comes along and says, okay, to comply with my CMMC, I need somebody to do X, Y, and Z for me. You want to have a reliable place to go because these guys, the people making the decisions, are going to be relying on what's known as a third-party attestation. Somebody else has done the homework for them, right? So they need some place to go. Well, CMMC, the Accreditation Board, and the Office of Secretary of Defense have already said that there's going to be a reciprocal relationship between FedRAMP and CMMC. So it's not there yet. It's getting closer. Push comes to shove, I would still look towards the FedRAMP listed set of products for somebody who provides you what you need, because it's probably only a matter of time before they either become compliant. You're going to be less further off by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The FAR is an interesting twist on that. So a little bit of history. The FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. There's a specific supplement attached to it from Department of Defense called the DFAR. As most laws are, they tend to have been written for where we were when they were written,
Mm-hmm.
not for where they are now. The FAR has a number of sections. Off the top of my head, I think it's 5 of them that, let's just say, they're not cloud friendly. So like one of the things it talks about in there is around forensics, where if something doesn't go well and there's an investigation, the FAR mandates that you can go in and get a physical hard drive with all the data that's been sequestered so you can do your forensics on it. Well, that doesn't work in a cloud environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a handful of those. I think it's section C through G off the top of my head. I should have looked it up before we talked, but you get the idea.
Yep.
So the FedRAMP, we know is already there. It's going to be there. There's going to be a reciprocal relationship. I would still look towards that. And it's probably only a matter of time before the FAR gets updated. One of the things we've learned during the CMMC process is Congress does have the appetite to update these things. So I'm sure we're going to see it, especially with the recent executive order from the Biden administration, the letter that was recently released from the White House, and all the stuff we're getting in the news around, meat processing, pipelines, Microsoft Exchange. I mean, SolarWinds, we can go through the list. It's only a matter of time.
Mm-hmm. So now, speaking of the cloud, what would we say the top security concerns are with the cloud versus an in-house server or any other options?
All right, so top security concerns. The short answer is it's all about the data. All about the data. That's your number one concern in the cloud. Drilling in a little deeper, the cloud providers will tell you their top 3 concerns are data loss, what's known as session hijacking. Basically, you as a valid user, some bad guy comes in and takes over your session, and insider threat. So as a consumer of cloud, you worry about your data. That's the absolute number one thing you do. I highly recommend you encrypt the data before giving it to the cloud service provider. That key that was used to encrypt that data, don't store it with the same cloud service provider. Store it someplace else, and store it in a place where if you get hit with like a ransomware attack, it doesn't encrypt your key. Because if without that key, you're gone. That's something that people forget to tell you. The other thing I would do around the data, if you can, and it's not economically possible for everybody, but if you can, I would keep a backup copy of whatever you have in the cloud someplace else, whether it be on site, another cloud service provider, off-site storage, whatever, because it's all about the data. It's always all about the data. The other thing to think about, if you look at the top 3 concerns that are out there around the cloud, access control is incredibly important. Identity management. So look at having something that's federated. There's a lot of tools out there like what's known as CASBs, Cloud Access Security Brokers, excellent tools. And it really provides you a place that you have to manage one place for all your access control, for all your cloud activities. And it also goes back into your enterprise. Access control, encrypt your data.
So that sounds like a very handy tool. Is that something that a small or medium business would be able to afford?
Actually, yes. It's
okay.
The pricing on that is a lot lower than you would think it would be.
That sounds very handy, very nice and neat and compartmentalized for all of your cloud activities. So
it is.
Put that on the screen.
Yeah, and a lot of people. It's interesting. A lot of the larger cloud providers, or even the different product vendors are starting to, because it's important to them for you to keep your access control correct, because they're worried about your session being hijacked and then being liable. They're making it very aggressive, and I've seen deals where they'll give them away. You just have to maintain it. Remember, you give away responsibility, you can't give away accountability.
Right. That's true. That's true. All right. So then what about operational concerns with the cloud?
All right. Now, this is interesting. The operational concerns have a different flavor to them because it's really a business flavor. First of all, never forget when you're dealing with a cloud or a third-party provider, and this is true of all third-party providers, it's a shared responsibility model. So they provide a certain set of services, they provide a certain set of guarantees. You still have activities you need to do. So for example, there was a major hack a few years ago of a bank, and it was found out the problem was the bank themselves didn't set up their firewall on their end correctly. So the cloud provider did what they were supposed to do, but the financial institution, it was a financial institution, not a bank, excuse me, that they didn't do what they needed to do, and it caused a whole lot of problems. So never forget it's a shared responsibility model. Also, what people don't forget or don't remember is each one of these cloud services, whether it's application as a service, a generic cloud provider, infrastructure, platform, whatever, they all have their own uptimes and mean times to repair. Take a look and make sure that they conform with what you need, whether it be mandated from you by laws, the regulators, the jurisdiction you're in, your contractual requirements, or your own business requirements. Ensure that they go in there. The common terms around that are RTO and RPO, recovery time objective, how fast you need to come back, recovery point objective, how much data you can lose. So if you are like a bank where your regulator says you have to be back online in 4 hours, you want to talk to your cloud provider, because if they say they can't be back for 6, you got a problem. And
that's a good point. Very good point.
People forget that.
Yeah.
Now, a really good place to look for this is the Global Resilience Federation, grf.org.
Okay, I'll put that up there on the screen.
Please.
It's part of our recommended resources. Okay.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of good work in this space. There's others working on it as well, but they're doing the best. The other good resource to throw out in this area is the Cloud Security Alliance, CSA.org. I would look to those two, especially when it comes for operational. They're probably the two organizations that are on the forefront of this.
Great.
From an operational perspective.
Okay. And what would you say the top mistakes are that are happening, probably by the business owner?
Well, number one, and I bring this up because it's caused me a lot of pain and I've bounced my head off of too many walls because of it, is a misunderstanding that the cloud is just not a data center. It's much more than just a data center owned by somebody else. It's that web we were talking about that has a different way of operating. It's got all these other security tools and all that inside. And that seems to cause a lot of folks to start going down the wrong road and not getting their head around it. That's the number one. The number two, I would say, is folks lose sight that this is a shared responsibility model. So just because you hire somebody to handle something for you doesn't mean you're off the hook. You're still accountable, right? And you need to do your due diligence around that. By the way, most people will not recognize that the vanilla contract is not the end of the game. You can still put particulars in place to your situation, and you can negotiate. If they can't be put into the contract, which is not uncommon, there is still an SLA, a service level agreement document, that, or sometimes they give it a different title, that can still be attached to the base contract to ensure that you do get the level of service that you need when you need it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's a very good point. And I still like the analogy about the data center is like renting an apartment, right? You're renting space, and so that's a good way for people to remember that the cloud is different than the apartment.
Exactly. Glad
Okay.
you like it.
Yeah, I did like that one. All right, so what are our top lessons learned for the cloud?
All right, top lessons learned, and I'm going back through personal history. The top lesson learned is there's a big difference between an app that was built to work on premise and an app that was built to work in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a simple lift and shift. So there's a lot of features and functions and beautiful things that the cloud affords you to do, but you can only get those benefits if you have an application that's made to take use of those. The other is, obviously we're not going to talk about stuff we've talked about before, but attestation. So when you go to a cloud provider like a FedRAMP and you get their assessment, you look at a FedRAMP, you look at a SOC 1, you look at a SOC 2, you look at all these reports. People seem to forget that those reports are around the risk appetite of the provider. They're not necessarily conforming to your risk appetite. So review those closely and then look at what they provide and ask yourself the question, does it give me the level of security or function that I need it to? Like the example we had a minute ago, if you have a legal requirement to be back online within 4 hours, but they promise 6,
that's a problem.
That's a problem. You got to do something. The regulator is not going to come back and say, oh, well, we'll just let it go for you. It ain't going to happen. You're going to be writing checks.
Yep. And I hate to say this, but it's not a matter of if something is going to happen to somebody. It's a matter of when it's going to happen to all of us. So we need to be aware that these things are, not just going to happen to somebody else. Because I hear that a lot of the times. Oh, yeah, that's not going to happen to me.
Yeah. Now we'll go down that. We'll take a slight little detour. We'll go on the cyber cul-de-sac for a second. Mm-hmm. That should be the number one lesson from ransomware right now. Mm-hmm. You can do all the right things and still get hit. And if you look at the numbers, and maybe this is a different podcast someday, but if you look at all the numbers and you look at all the reality, the organizations that do the best are the ones that are prepared to detect, manage, and correct. And
back up their data. Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, test the backups.
Yes, that's a very good point, because a lot of people, they say, oh, it's stored, it backs up automatically to the cloud, or it backs wherever it's backing up. And have they ever tried to restore or even looked at a backup? That's a big question.
I cannot tell you how many times I have been pulled in to an incident response or doing a third-party assessment, and when we go to ask them about the backups, they've never tested them.
Right, yeah, so that's an extra little tidbit. Well, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you were able to share some of your knowledge for our listeners and our viewers. And we hope that you'll come back again and do another video and another topic and help everybody along with their CMMC journey.
Oh, I would love to. Thank you very much for having me. Anything I could do. And, anybody who sees this video, Alex Sharpe, Sharpe like a knife, E on the end, just Google me, hit me up on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Feel free.
Down in the description too. So thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.